Creative Officer of the Exploratorium, which you will soon learn very, very much about. Big fan of Tom and his work on the Exploratorium and other things that I hope he shares today. But with that, I will hand it over to Tom. Tom, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. Wow, it's so great to see some of you out there, and some of you who I know, Orna, Adam, others. Anyway, lovely to be here. Orna, where are you? I want to know right now. Are you in Hamburg? I don't know if
Paris.
you're in Paris now. Okay, all right. Well, lucky you. All right, good. Cool. All right, so I am going to share my screen. I'm going to talk for about half of the time, and then I look forward to the conversation. So let me share my screen. All right, everybody seeing this? Okay, cool. I will enter slideshow mode. Okay, so the title will become clear: Inquiry, Immersion, and maybe Transformation, if we're lucky. We'll see about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Exploratorium, but I'm also going to talk about some of my own interests that sometimes cross paths with the Exploratorium and sometimes don't. So sort of on the left are some historic images of the Exploratorium. Then there's some things that are more recent. And then, what's going on with the dance that has to do with contact improvisation, which is something that I'm interested in practice. And then there's actually it's Mandala Lab from the Rubin Art Museum, which is a spiritual space in a museum, which is another one of my interests. So anyway, combination Explo and my own self. So here's the map. We will come back to this again, but these are things that at the Exploratorium, it's very, very common to talk about inquiry. I sometimes talk about it as the high temple for inquiry. It's the one word that everybody at the Exploratorium can agree on, even though we all have different interpretations. Immersion is a little bit more, we do it, but we're also sometimes ambivalent about it. And I'll get into that in a second. And I want to talk about both sort of 360 environments, but also embodiment as a form of immersion. And then this maybe category of transformation. We do talk a lot about learning and agency, creating both learning and agency for our visitors. The next two words, I don't think we talk as much about in the field, maybe even about change for good. We implicitly are talking about change that we want to be for good. And how often do we talk about existential spiritual meaning making? We'll get to that in a second. So it's sort of, going a little bit more on the edge there. But I'm going to start in safe territory, at least for any of my colleagues from the Exploratorium, talking about inquiry. So this is a photograph in our old building of an exhibit. It's a spinning turntable, and this is a beloved exhibit because it can be used in many, many different ways. It can be used to teach physics. It can be used to learn about motion. It can also be used to have dialogues, though, about what is happening, cause and effect. And you notice some people are watching, some people are actually actively participating. Somebody is reading their map to the side. One of the key things about inquiry for us is that it is learner-centered and that there are truly open, authentic possibilities for the learner. It's not just, I want to teach you this, therefore I want you to learn this. No, it's a situation, a phenomenon we invite people into. It's like this, it's like a meal. We invite people into this meal and we let them choose exactly what they want to do. So the element of free choice is very important to us pedagogically, and I would say even politically as well. So we certainly, we have done experiences in collaboration with others at the Exploratorium around the world. I think that element of agency, that element of multisensory learning, these are all very important elements. And a lot of our experiences are exactly at this scale. They are tabletop. They work kind of at something that is between a desk and a kitchen table, or maybe a dining room table, but they tend to be often quite intimate because at that scale is a scale where we find that visitors can and do really throw their bodies into things and throw their curiosity into what they're doing. So there is an element, and there's lots of educational literature on this, of surprise, delight, joy, discovery, all these things that science centers love to talk about. And again, I love just seeing what are all the people doing here? What are they seeing? What are they thinking about? We don't know completely, but that level of engagement, that first person engagement. And so I know when talking about experience design, we talk often a lot about large scale, but this kind of just personal joy, I see it every day when I walk on the floor, that sort of personal throwing my own curiosity into an experiment or an experience. So again, there are lots of things we could highlight. I could give days of talks about inquiry, but three words I'm using here are multisensory, I think is important. A lot of the exploratory experiences are hands and eyes, although there are many other senses that get involved. Curiosity is something that belongs to the learner. It is not something that belongs to the teacher. So we talk much less about teaching than we talk about learning, and we try to facilitate learning that is authentic to the learner and where the phenomena being investigated are authentic. So this is an important word to us, but you'll see how you stretch the limits. What do you mean by authenticity? But we are less likely to want to create pretend environments than, if at all possible, make an opportunity for somebody to really explore the environment or the situation that is really there without us sort of creating the artifice of the context. Okay, so we've researched and published on inquiry a lot, especially inquiry in exhibits, but also inquiry when teaching teachers or helping teachers actually learn how to work in different ways. A lot of our work has been done in conjunction with artists. You see Ned Kahn, who was on staff and then went on to have a very successful career with phenomena-based exhibits. Ruth Asawa, who is an amazing artist, was involved in the early days of the Exploratorium, as well as an artist in residency. But when I talk about multisensory examples, I want to point out that they're not always all physical science, okay? So this is actually a taste exhibit, or at least the one in the middle is a taste exhibit. So it's physical sciences, and it's about tasting different degrees of salinity in water. So we did this outdoors, and there's 1 degree of salinity when it tastes just like blood. And that is actually the degree of salinity where our body actually took its salinity from the sea around us, right? So incredible history there around that. So that's physical science and biology. The one on the left is a drinking fountain on a toilet. So it's a cognitive science exhibit because it's the most photographed exhibit we have. People drink from that. I like to call it sort of an homage to Duchamp with a twist there. And then the one on the right is actually a social psychology experiment. It's a version of the prisoner's dilemma in which 2 visitors actually decide whether they're going to give each other a squirt or a sip of water. And they go through the whole prisoner's dilemma thing about whether they're doing that or not. And it's a playful way to take a social psychological phenomenon. So the phenomena do not only have to be light or water or salinity, they can be interactions around people, around trust, collaboration, and competition. So going back to the Exploratorium, a lot of our experiences are sort of tabletop size. People gather around these little fires. I like this black and white. One of our photographers didn't even want me to use this picture because it's so dark, but I kind of love it in a way because it's the old Exploratorium environment, and you see all of that interest concentrating at the size of a kitchen table. So when we talk about immersivity in a second, we'll talk about some of the dynamics that come from this. But again, if any of you come to ASDC or come here in the summer, we just opened an exhibit on AI. So it's not only the physical and sensory engagement. We are doing interactives, and some of them are tabletop, some of them are larger exhibits. We do sometimes use more graphics. And this is our summer show called Adventures in AI, which I look forward to more conversations with many of you about. Again, here, wherever possible, we try to make it phenomenological, where there's something that the visitor can do physically. It's not just all on a screen. And so hopefully we've been able to take a topic that is purely digital and actually bring it down more into the physical as well. Okay, so that's 10 minutes on inquiry. Could go on at length about that. So let's talk about immersion. This is Futurespaces. We often have sessions on immersion. Immersion is all the rage now. An interesting thing, I was wondering, I wonder how much people talked about immersion before we had computer screens. And I almost wonder whether the phenomenon of immersion is actually being spoken about because we spend so much time in collapsed, smaller environments that therefore we want to kind of liberate our body back out. So it's an interesting question, and I'm going to raise some historical examples about where we do immersion and how we actually we may crave it more right now because we often collapse our attention down into a smaller space. So, okay. So then in talking about immersion, I'm going to just add these two elements. The inquiry is still there, and I want to add an element of just 360-degree environment, just really paying attention to what is above you. And actually, just for a moment now, I can't see you all on screen, but just for a moment, everybody, do a 360 scan. Just like take your eyes up and over and look at your ceiling for a moment. And then go down to one side and look at the floor. I wish I could see you all. I hope some of you are doing this, right? And then go to this side, back up to the ceiling, and back down again onto the screen. So just, anyway, acknowledge the body. And those are the 2 points. There's both the body as in the space that expands out from me, but there's also the body as in me, as an agent, as a moving creature, as a moving body mind. And I think we should talk a lot about the body when we talk about immersion. So, okay, now I zoom out a little bit. This is another old photo at the Exploratorium, but the fact is, it was always an environment, even though many of these exhibits are, human scaled. Most of them aren't bigger in any one dimension than 10 feet. Some of them are, but most of them aren't. But together they make an environment, and together they make a 360-degree environment. So then the Exploratorium in its history has always had this weird combination of an almost non-intentional environment that is like a garage assembly of lots of small experiences. I would venture that that's actually a pretty unique environment in a world in which a lot of our environments are shaped by either grand design or retail design. A space with a bunch of these little pieces that just add up to a whole, but they're a little bit more random. I mean, the cabinetry on one of these exhibits is nothing like the cabinetry on another one. There's a degree of authenticity to that environment as a whole, as a global thing, that I think is actually an important quality that we still treasure in some ways. And so here you see on a newer exhibit that actually Orna was even an advisor on, called Science of Sharing, but we've tried to keep some of that quality of like, it's a bunch of small experiences, but in a larger space, and there's a lot of activity everywhere. And it's a little bit chaotic, by the way, which can be an immersive quality that some people like and some people not as much. There always was an element of bringing craftspeople into the Exploratorium. We would do these crafts demos, and then a big part of our experience is that our exhibit development shop is visible to the visitors. So it really is more like a garage than many other museums. It's a place where we build the exhibits, we show people, we have dialogue with visitors about what we're working on with our exhibits, and we put our prototypes just right on the other side of that little low gate there. And so we bring the prototypes in and out of the shop. And again, that creates an immersive environment of not only is this a place for display, but it's a place for the actual making of these objects. It's also a place where we try to create experiences where the visitors themselves can make things. That gets a little bit more complicated. This was part of an exhibition on the summer of 24 called Extraordinary. It was about sort of extraordinary things with ordinary materials. This was a project by the collective called Slow Art Collective. So, but even in the early days of the Exploratorium, we did experiment with other types of immersion. This is an early version of the tactile dome, which is an experience in which you actually go through in the dark and you actually have an experience in the dark. And again, I keep on mentioning Orna. I'm going to keep picking on you because you're still visible on my screen. But if you want to talk about dialogues in the dark, and in fact, Josh, if you haven't had Orna or Andreas be part of Futurespaces, they should definitely be part of Futurespaces at some point because of their work there. So, but this was truly an immersive experience. And I just want to point out that removing the senses can be an immersive experience. being in the dark can be a very powerful immersive experience, and it has been for us. This is one of the most memorable things that when I talk to people who grew up in the Bay Area, they remember their trip to the Exploratorium and to the Tactile Dome. So, but we moved. We moved from the Palace of Fine Arts that was kind of this kind of airplane hangar, just very dark space. And we moved to a place that had views of the city. We moved to Pier 15 and 17, views of the city, and then views out actually out to the bay. But again, we tried to create exhibits that, even though the exhibits may be small, this is Susan Schwarzenberg and the observatory team created a whole series of exhibits that put you in relationship with another authentic immersive environment, which is the landscape. So to what extent can we instrument the landscape is the language we use. To what extent can you get people to pay attention to aspects of the landscape? So one interesting exhibit here was that if you start looking at flagpoles around the city, you notice the wind patterns, and you just need to pay attention to that. And you start noticing that you actually have a ready-made exhibit there of the wind currents in all of San Francisco if you start looking at all the flags in the landscape. But you sometimes need somebody to help you pay attention to that. So then I'm going to do the Futurespaces moment here of just talking about how the fact that even though we do tons of analog exhibits, we have a whole history of digital artists coming into the Exploratorium. It's mostly outside artists that we have come in, artists either as for an installation or for an artist in residency. But some of the earlier digital immersive experiences, like Ed Tannenbaum's Recollections Room here, very early in science museums, was, I think, a sort of a pivotal piece for museums and has existed there for a long time. Then Camille Uderbach did several pieces with us, and she did some of the first, the one, I think she did one of the ones where the letters kind of cascade around you. Scott Snibbe, if you don't know his work, this was a fascinating psychological piece where this was called Shy. And this shape would only come towards you if you were still for a while. You had to stay still, and then it would approach you. But if you started moving, it would go away from you. So it was a very interesting interaction. And then more recent names like Rafiq Anadol. We tend to specialize, though, in artists before they become really famous and expensive, and then we can't afford them any longer. If you don't know Lynette Walworth's work, this is a VR piece called Collisions. This is about this gentleman whose first experience with the sort of modern technological 20th century was actually seeing a mushroom cloud. And it's sort of his recollection and sort of story of that collision between his culture and sort of the modern technological culture. But it's a VR piece. And then more recently, working with Bernie Krause and United Visual Artists, we created a whole room for the Great Animal Orchestra, which was a sonification of animal sounds from around the world. Okay. So when talking immersion, I also want to touch on gross motor engagement. So for years, I built community-built playgrounds. So we would actually go out into a community, and like in a matter of a couple of weeks, we would build something like this project in Enid, Oklahoma. So it was very hands-on from the building standpoint, but then the actual experience of the playground, when you think about playgrounds, they are places for the body to be immersed in and for the body to do things that we can't typically do in other places. So there are exhibits, plenty of them at the Exploratorium, that do engage the full body. And Carl Buescher created this shadow box. It's been repeated in museums all around the world. This Jen Lewin's piece involved, again, a partially digital environment in which you stepped around and used your full body. This guy here is a Fields medalist, a mathematician, Bill Thurston, a good friend of mine. He's passed away now, but a fairly famous among mathematician. And he and I were both homeschooling our kids together, and we decided, you know what? The way to teach geometry and math is not to teach it through like equations and notebooks and computers, but it's to teach it through movement, to actually teach it through how the body moves through space. So we started a project together that then I brought to the Exploratorium to create these geometric structures that you could climb through that actually taught you different forms of geometry. This is a gyroid. It's a topologically interesting space. I won't get into the details, but if you want to know, I can share more later on. And it took us, you have safety concerns with something like this. It took us 2 or 3 tries to figure out how to do it in a safe way. But we really are using some of the insights from dance theory. There's a whole Rudolf Laban had a whole theory of the human body moving in an icosahedron. And I would encourage all of us who are experienced designers to think about the human body in that 360-degree context. And sure enough, here's a new version. Actually, this is right here in Omaha of the gyroid that people can climb through and travel through. And that also brings me to this other bit of my own personal passion around contact improvisation, which is a form of improvisational dance that in many ways gets you to start thinking about your body in space in a full 360-degree way. So I'm going to dwell on this too long, but there's a lot of pedagogy that has gone into thinking about how a body arrives into a space energetically, how it assembles, how it then explores the space and then starts to expand what they call the kinesphere, the actual overall space, the kinetic space that a body can occupy. So some of these glyphs that were developed by Nancy Stark-Smith, who was one of the founders of contact improvisation, I think could be interesting and useful to immersive experience designers. And here again, you see, here's the gyroid, here's our attempt to do some of this type of movement in a museum. But again, how many times, especially as adults, are we given permission to put our bodies in situations that are unusual? Josh, you were talking about ball pits. I think that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of ball pits in these immersive spaces, is that we actually want to put the body in unusual situations. Okay, so now we get to the more maybe speculative side, and I want to talk about transformation. And the reason I want to do that is I think sometimes we get hooked on experience, excitement, but to what end? I guess the question that I want to ask is, are you doing it to create learning? Are you trying to create change for good? Are you trying to provoke existential and spiritual meaning making? Are you actually, and the reason I say some of these things is, I don't think we talk enough in experience design, or at least I don't get to talk as much as I'd like to about existential and spiritual meaning making, because I think that's the business that we're in many ways. And I think if we look at the long history of experience design, that's the way that spatial design has been used. So I'm going to talk about some ways in which we talk about it at the Exploratorium and ways that we don't. So again, learning what? So learning, we get lots of money. We used to get lots of money from the National Science Foundation to create learning experiences. But I do want to always ask the question, learning what? There's a way in which our commodified culture is just like more information, just-in-time information. Is that really, to what end? Is that, whose common good is that for? So I would invite us all to really think about what learning are we trying to promote? And that is where the Exploratorium has, with the discourse around inquiry, talks about it's not as much the content as it is the sense of agency for the learner. And we do this with children, but we also have to do it with teachers, because teachers are afraid of learning again. Teachers are, because in order to learn, you have to admit that you don't know something. So when we work with teachers, we have to help the teachers remember what it's like not to learn something and to enjoy not knowing something. So you have to go back to the ignorance, I don't even like that word. You have to go back to the beginner's mind to actually be a learner again. And this is a picture from a beloved adventure playground, which just points to the fact that the more agency you can give a learner, the more environment you can let them create, the more immersive it is and the more meaningful it is to them in certain ways. So I think thus far, everybody at the Exploratorium would be on board with what I'm saying. So then I want to add this other element, where I want to talk about contemplative inquiry. And I think at least I'm interested in talking about that more. And I think contemplative inquiry can apply to immersion and embodiment and for meaning making. So we could talk at length about meaning making about what, and we'll have to probably do that another day, but this is an interesting picture. So these we've helped, we were asked by the Dalai Lama to help these Buddhist monks in exile learn inquiry-based science methods. So this is a moment of inquiry-based exploration by Buddhist monastics, monks and nuns in this space here. And it got me thinking about inquiry versus the contemplative practices that they spend a lot of their life, starting usually as very young, at least as teenagers, practicing. And it's made me curious about where and how in our society we create opportunities for contemplation or not. So, of course, some of you may have gone on a meditation retreat. This is Spirit Rock. I've been there several times, and this is what it looks like when nobody is in there. But a space to retreat into silence, not only darkness, but as people who design spaces know, silence can be a very powerful immersive experience. And it can be an invitation to go inside and to bring the inquiry not necessarily out into the world, but to bring it on the inside. And there are just as many fun things waiting for you there as there are in other places. And I do want to mention prayer. I do want to call out prayer, which at the moment in the world, more than 80% of people consider themselves religious or spiritual. So even though probably on this call, it's a much lower percentage, I do want to call out that this is an important practice for contemplation for many people, and that religious spiritual spaces are a place where people go for immersion and they go for transformation. And so maybe we can be thinking about that. I'm not proposing any specific religious identity, but I do want to point out that prayer can be individual, prayer can be social and collective, and prayer can lead to amazing environment and experience design. So these are two pictures from Prague. I was just in Prague a couple of weeks ago. Gothic churches were state-of-the-art technology for their time, audiovisual technology of stained glass windows. Baroque design was amazing immersion. You may or may not like Baroque, but the Baroque church on the left is a remarkable church. And the amount and the intentionality around the spiritual goals of a space like that are something that we may not talk as much about and that may be interesting for us. I would like to say that museums basically started becoming more common when sacred spaces were less shared across a culture, and that we should look at our long history of people assembling in spaces for meaning making that goes back a bit. And like, as I said, it's multisensory, it's audiovisual, cutting edge technology for its time, and it's auditory, best organs, available. And it's not only in Christian churches. This is a rock cut temple in Ellora, India, which is a remarkable place if you ever get the chance to go there. It's an incredible immersive experience. The whole thing was carved out of a cliff, all four sides. And it's an amazing immersive experience to go to. But immersion and contemplation also happen by removing the senses. There's a whole movement now to do darkness retreats for a day, a week. I listened to somebody talk who did it for 31 days in absolute darkness. They hand them the food underneath, and that's an ultimate form of immersion. But it also can involve the movement of the body. There are practices in somatic theories. There are practices for something called authentic movement, which is essentially a shared meditation. You close your eyes as a mover, but you're witnessed by other people. And it's a practice that is not explicitly religious, but it is spiritual for many people. Again, these slides are available. The names of the people are on there. Janet Adler was really one of the founders of authentic movement. And then I come back to this example here. This is, I think, from the traveling version of Mandela Lab that the Rubin Art Museum created. And that center orb, it's not really an orb, it looks like a series of nested bowls, it brightens and then darkens at a pace, and it encourages people to breathe to the pace of that. And so you wind up breathing in synchrony with other people. You may be interested in meditation, you may not be, but I actually experienced this with somebody who was actually quite resistant to meditation, but actually found it a very calming experience. And I would invite us all to think about immersion, not only with all the bells and whistles with the Baroque version, but versions like this that actually hopefully take us into a more contemplative space. And again, I want to be clear, I'm playing with these ideas. I'm playing with them a little bit at the Exploratorium, somewhere elsewhere. But I'm going to end, though, just talking about somebody who is in some ways an important teacher for the Exploratorium. And the link is there on the slide if you want to go back to it. But if you just Google Exploratorium, Bob Miller, and Light Walk, you'll get this experience. And I want to point out that it can be educational and it can be contemplative and it can be immersive. Bob did this beautiful light walk, which was basically getting you to pay attention to what is happening in the light in the environment around there. Now, I don't know if you know, but all of these little circles on this piece of foam core here are actually images of the sun coming through the leaves. So basically, every one of those little holes in the leaves that are not circular shaped become an image. It's like hundreds of camera obscuras of the sun. So there you are, you're immersed, you're just outdoors, but you're paying attention to our local star and you're seeing hundreds of images of our star. And if you get a chance to do this during an eclipse, you'll actually know that it really is what's going on, because what you'll see is a whole series of mini eclipse images when you see that. So again, I think bringing it back to the Exploratorium sometimes experiments with things that are more contemplative. We're playing with more of them. We actually want to we're working with a partner in Asia on essentially a playground that will involve much more contemplative, slow movements rather than the big, crazy ones that we did with the geometry playground. But this journey from immersion that is large, Baroque, involves all the senses, to immersion that is also more internal and maybe in some cases explicitly about trying to understand our place in the universe, whether it's just the solar system or the bigger universe, is a journey that I continue to have a lot of fun with. And thank you for following along. There's the map of the talk again, and that's it.
Tom, that's fantastic. All right. I have so many post-it notes, so many thoughts. But I would say that if people have questions or comments, feel free to go camera on and just kind of like raise your hand or whatever, and we'll call on you and we'll make it happen. Wait, I just saw a hand go up. Oh,
I also
sorry.
want to make a shout out. I see several people from Omaha here now. I just saw another one, Silver Raker, who's also here in Omaha, which is where I am today too, because I'm working on a project that involves science and spirituality in some ways. So that's a whole other story.
All right. Shout out to Saddle Creek. All right, Scott G.
Yeah, I just had a question about accessibility because there's a lot of different pieces that allow for, and there's different forms of accessibility depending on different needs of a person. But specifically, you're showing like the piece where there's a lot of crawling and moving through it, and just thinking through how you figure out ways to create different type of experiences that give a similar feel for different types of people.
Yeah. Well, so the good news on that is playgrounds have had to deal with this very, very directly. And playgrounds have had a lot of work with people with extreme or mild physical disabilities. And so there's a lot of work around what children, for example, a child in a wheelchair wants. They don't expect to be able to do a certain kind of jungle gym, but they do want to be around the children who are in that. So they want to be in the locus of play. And for many, many of them, they can transfer out of their wheelchair into an environment and they can use their upper body strength. So again, most fields have worked on ways of thinking about accessibility around, but when you're dealing with multisensory learning, there are going to be limitations with different senses with different people. And I also want to talk about, emotional, cognitive neurodiversities that make it complex. I think some of our overstimulating environments are terrible for certain people who may need more soothing environments. They can also be very helpful for certain people with certain forms of neurodiversity. So I tend to find if you can talk to people who are activists, around disability rights, and this is another place where Orna can also talk to you at length around this work. They involve them in the design process and talk realistically. They're very realistic about what's both safe and inviting and inclusive.
Fantastic. All right, next question. All right, Tom, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about, um, the idea of immersion and awe. And I think, in some ways, I think one of the things that I really kind of I always had this very like complex relationship with like those Van Gogh projection rooms because like I think in some ways like they're actually very disempowering. Like not only are they like showing these people at like at a sort of a monumental scale that makes them feel like they're not human, but like they feel like they're kind of disempowering and certain in that they sort of take over all of your senses and sort of like like they like I don't they don't allow for conversation. Like I wonder how you think about those qualities of immersion.
Yeah, I went to a Chagall show at Atelier Lumiere in Paris, and I was actually pleasantly surprised, to be honest, because I saw kids dancing to the imagery there in a way that was truly heartwarming. And the combination of the music and the projections on the floor and on the walls, they didn't feel to me like it was taking agency away. It was actually getting people to move in their bodies. So now let's go back to the Baroque era, or even maybe the Gothic era. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been in a mosque, a temple, a cathedral, or spaces like that, and you can both feel very small, or you can also feel like you're connected to something very big. And I think science can make you feel very small and insignificant. So how do you deal with that? I think that's
Yeah.
one of the huge problems that science actually has to deal with, is that science has given us a universe right now that is far bigger than our imagination could have imagined beforehand, and far smaller than we could have imagined. And it's disorienting. So then how do you help people feel at home in, I'll use a word that Christians like to use, but not only Christians, creation? How do you help people feel at home in, whether it's theistically created or not? I'm not going to go there, but how do you ideally set the stage so that people can develop their relationship with that which is awesome? Because frankly, I think birth and death, the expanding universe, and the quantum universe are pretty damn awesome and a little bit terrifying,
Yeah.
when I think about it. So I need to have a relationship with those things. And do we give people places where they can meditate on, who am I at this middle scale that I exist in relation to such vastness and such awe and such smallness?
No, I love it. I love it. Yeah, it makes me think of, is, the age, is the all providing agency, where does it lead? And, I feel like, the issue I think I have with like the worst of those projection places is that the agency that it's giving you is to like a catharsis through the gift shop. Like it's
No, no,
just
no,
building up that moment where you can buy a $30 t-shirt.
no. And I actually agree that there are some of them that feel manipulative, that it's spectacle for spectacle's sake. And I do want to say another thing about awe, though, is there's a researcher at Berkeley, Dacher Keltner, who wrote a book on awe.
Yeah, it's great.
And again, the relationship between awe and being out in nature is it's a very powerful experience for a lot of people. And so like being out in the woods, the ultimate immersion, why do we need to create these other immersions? I don't know, but we do. Um, but but and he had a conference about awe, and I was sort of interested. Awe sometimes to me is this, like a stand back, and there can be something that makes me feel puny in relationship to awe. So sometimes I think about wonder, and a lot of the Exploratorium exhibits, I don't know if you noticed, but everybody's leaning in, right? So it's like, if you think about it somatically, you have awe is this, and wonder is leaning in. I want to mess with it. I want to play with it. And
I
so
love it.
I like that distinction sometimes. And maybe sometimes we want to make sure that there's accessible wonder that people can lean into, rather than just awe that makes us like,
Uh,
lean back.
I feel like those Eskimos were like with all the names of snowflakes. It's great to name all these these things. All right, I'm not gonna monologue anymore. Vinicius, you had a question.
Sure. Tom, thank you so much for such a profound presentation. I wasn't expecting that. Regarding distinctions between like awe and wonder, I was wondering, especially as a non-native English speaker, how do you see inquiry being different from curiosity? And what are the different ways to interpret that you mentioned that people in the exploratorium might have?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I mean, I used the word curiosity, and we had an ad campaign for a while at the Exploratorium, which was for the curious ones. And so I think curiosity is a big piece of inquiry. People who have written about inquiry and studied it much more than I do will also say that there are other steps. The curiosity might be the initial spark of like being invited in, but then, you know, inquiry or sometimes inquiry, depending where you are in the world, how you want to use that word, it gets used in conjunction with scientific inquiry. And the inquiry that somebody who's building a giant telescope to like probe, you know, for dark matter in the universe or exoplanets, that's inquiry too. And those are very disciplined questions. So there can be later stages for inquiry. I think the curiosity and interest is an early stage. It's the falling in love part of inquiry. I think there's the hard, you know, after the honeymoon is over part of inquiry, which is asking questions and often not getting the answer you want or having to keep on coming back. And I think that that's where, you know, increasing people's tolerance for asking those questions could be a goal. And ideally, it's something you do. I think it's hard to do in a museum environment where you've got a lot of stimulation, but in a workshop you can. And in a workshop, you can encourage people to really own their own questions.
Oh, I love it. Fantastic. All
Thank
right.
you.
Anybody have a question? Or are you gonna allow me to dive right in? Christopher, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question. It's something that came up, sorry, coming from Milan here, American, but transplanted 20 some years ago. I had a question that came up that is, I think, really interesting about curiosity. So going back to the same kind of linking onto what you were just talking about. Uh, in our generation, so I'm a Gen Xer, I think, classified. Uh, we had to kind of hunt for knowledge. We had this curiosity. I'm extremely curious. I'm always getting into things, going off on tangents, rabbit holes, left and right. The new generation can just basically turn on knowledge like turning on a faucet, right? So you can actually, you don't have to, you don't have to fight for knowledge. You just turn on Chat GPT or Gemini or whatever you happen to be using as far as learning large models. So what do you think, what do you foresee with your crystal ball, of course, what do you foresee happening with the new generation of actually approaching curiosity? Will they be more curious, less curious? I think the embodiment will be extremely important. So I'd like to just pick your brain, hear your opinion on that.
Yeah. Great question. And saluti a Milano. I grew up in Italy. I grew up in Rome. So I'm the opposite. My parents are Americans. They were expats. They moved to Italy. My dad was a sculptor. And so I grew up in Italy and then I came back to the States. So anyway, we could chat about that. But I think knowledge is cheap. I mean, it's become cheaper, but I think commodified knowledge has always been a bit of a problem because I also think you can be knowledge rich and wisdom poor. So that's why I am intrigued about thinking more about what is wisdom now. And I don't think wisdom is deliverable, on a Wikipedia page. I mean, maybe if it's a really good Wikipedia page, I don't know. But and I love Wikipedia, don't get me wrong. But so I think so you're asking about the future of curiosity. Well, first of all, I think it's a state of mind. So I think being out in the woods, being on a silent meditation retreat is going to give you a lot of questions to answer, maybe with the rest of your life, right? So I think maybe the question is what questions really matter. Is the question, is the question that matters of like, when did Genghis Khan live, a date, or is the question actually like, how can I deal with my own personal suffering, for example, right? So the reason I'm going there is I think that especially now, factual knowledge is cheap, and we can talk about misinformation, we can talk about alternative facts and all the problems with that, but I think the real issue is more a question of how do we encourage wisdom. And I think part of where wisdom comes from is from asking hard questions that are psychological, emotional, personal, that deal with your identity and challenge your identity in some ways. So I think that it's not just the phenomena out there, but it's me, or us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, good.
I wanna,
Good. That provoked Eric.
oh,
That guy.
I love it. I love this. Eric, I'm gonna let you ask a question, but I wanna throw something in there very quickly, which is like, one of the things I'm very interested in is this idea of the timeline of transformation. I think a lot of people are looking for like, that like that moment, it's like literally transcendence, it's like I'm gonna jump from one state to the next. I'm gonna take some DMT and I'm gonna, be something totally new, pop some, like and like then there's places like churches that you go to weekly, daily. There's gyms that you work your body daily. Like I'm very curious. And then even something like the Exploratorium. You're like, how do you imagine building a place around those rituals? Is it a one-time thing for tourists to transform them in a day, or is it something that works over the community over a long period of time? Like how do you think about that?
Um, I think it's a great question, and I think actually museums have a difficulty there because people go to museums not that often, right?
Right.
In their life. I mean, people like us probably go to them way too often, right? But we're professionals. But I am very interested in churches, and the reason I'm very interested in churches is that people go there explicitly for with a transformative and community building intent. And by the way, I say churches. I don't mean only. I don't mean Christian. I'm like, it could be atheist gatherings, Quaker silent meetings, mosques. I want to be very inclusive here about this. But people want that, they seek that, and they go back to it again and again. And it seems to me, in a weird way, by having the secular cultural world right now, in a way, has stayed away from talking about transformation or to what end. But people go to the gym a lot, so I'm sort of like, is it just about looking fit, but in a sense, or a meditation retreat is a spiritual gym. So could we do a little bit more of that? I don't know. I don't, and I'm not saying I want to make a religion and start making temples and things like that, but I do also think that, a secular culture that has a lot of messages about consuming being important to your identity could use a bit of counterbalancing that might suggest that there are other contemplative skills that we can develop, and they take time. If any of you have, I mean, like, I couldn't meditate until my 40s, and I still barely can. I mean, I'm just saying it takes time and practice. These are muscles that you build.
Yeah, oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I would conjecture that maybe you're in my sacred Zoom temple, of gradual transformation. Eric, you have a question.
Hi, actually, Josh, in some measure, it's building off of your question, but maybe looking at it a little bit more basically, which is as we push away from sort of tangible knowledge conveyance because it's so readily available, and as we look at broader, more subjective skills, or whatever we call them, habits of mind, participation, and as we look over larger time ranges, and as our research capacity for understanding how these things work falls away from under our feet. Um, I know, Tom, you're working on projects, or I'm sure there are others that are working on projects with similar goals. How are you going to guide yourself in understanding, what you're doing? How's it going? How you going to check on yourself to say, I think this, and I'm totally guilty of this. I think this is cool, therefore it's good, and I'm all about that, unfortunately. But it's there's the challenge of trying to understand, particularly if you want to build a culture of doing this kind of work. What are the I hate to say it, but how do you evaluate? How do you understand what's happening to people as they participate in these broader types of experiences?
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so first things first, like, this week right now with some prototyping that we're doing here for this project, we have a person who used to be an evaluator at the Exploratorium who is helping us evaluate these exhibits. So, you can do things like, if you have a conversation exhibit about, different people's conception of wisdom, say, for example, if you did an exhibit about that, there are measures around engagement time and dwell time so we can start with some of those clumsy tools that we use in the museum field. And then you can do interviews and you can do all of that machinery that we use for any kind of experience evaluation. You could use again here. I would venture that I do think I'm learning more about this, but there are a whole series of anthropologists who study spiritual experiences and contemplative practices.
Sure. Yeah.
And they have both observational things and they have interview things. So you can do that. But I also think ultimately the proof will be in the pudding. You know, the Exploratorium did not prove its value in its earliest years. People just came back. People liked something about it. So I do think, you know, it will wither if it's not successful. Now, are you really doing what you think you're doing, or are you doing something different? That's another question. But you know, so I think artists also are designing, but yeah, when you need the sort of what would really qualify as cognitive social science proof, and when you don't, are interesting questions.
Yeah.
But you know, but I'm open to them all, and I did see Orna raise her hand, and she might have thoughts on this
Yeah,
and other
Thank you.
things.
Thank
So.
you.
Orna, would you like to jump in? Oh, you're gonna mute. You're still muted though. Oh, there you go.
Hey, yes. Hello. Yes, well, there's several thoughts in my mind because of all what let's say that first of all, for me, a transformation, when we speak about a transformation, it means that I will change my reference. I will change something in myself. And so it's mean that to create a transformation, when we are working, we are really referring the transformative learning of Maziro. You need to create a disoriented dilemma and an immersive environment like silence or dark or whatever, a Gothic church or just something very small that suddenly I'm surprised. This disoriented dilemma will bring you to start a critical assessment about yourself. Normally, to have a transformation, you need you need to be with the other at least, because you need to see how the other, what is the reference of the other. Oh, it's me, it's something that is not working well, but he, what he's doing, and she, what he's doing. And in fact, the transformation is it's not coming one after, it's not coming like this, but it's a process. And it's a process that comes from a disoriented dilemma that can be an immersive or can be by curiosity, all what Tom say. But you need in a moment to have this critical assessing assumption. And you need after that to have this acquiring moment, but why I feel uncomfortable. And this will bring me to observe, to see it. And then I will explore option. It can be in meditation. In fact, all this is really a process. And I think that in museum, I just refer now quickly to the evaluation. Museum, when we are doing evaluation, at least at our place, we are doing it in really different way. In one, it's really the anthropologic way. It's in what's happened in and there. The other, it's before and after, and when you want to know what people have in mind before, but you have also for a long time, in fact, what people are doing 6 months after, what they are looking for, how it's influenced. This is a transformation. So yeah, so just some thought.
I love it. I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. Silva, you had a question?
I do. Thank you. Hi, Orna. Hi, Tom. My question is related to the last three comments, actually, and it's about the nature. We're used to thinking about exhibitions as these physical spaces, and obviously the kitchen table picture, the humans gathered around and interacting. But what do you think, based on the things that you've been saying, for that transformation to happen? Is there some way to think differently about these spaces and the frequency and the connection to outside the walls and all the soft stuff that's happening in there? Is there something really profoundly different about the way you're thinking about exhibitions now in that way, Tom? Thank you.
I'm going to say yes and no. And so the yes part is, again, I would argue that sacred spaces of gathering and teaching and learning were museums before we had museums. But there were different community rules, right? There might be shared rituals. So I thought you were going to ask about programs. I thought you were going to ask about facilitated things.
I started with that and I decided not to use the word. Since
but clearly, when you have a human facilitator there, you can bring somebody on a journey. There's just fewer off ramps. You can, like a lot of the dance workshops, like contact improvisation. I don't think you can teach it just with an exhibit. You need somebody who will see where you're at, start you doing it safely at first, and then doing it in more and maybe more ambitious ways. But also, I do think what Orna is saying about the relationship also, a facilitator can implicitly be that relationship, whether that person is a teacher, whether that person is purely holding space, like in that authentic movement modality, the witnesses don't say much. I mean, they're just holding the space for a while, and you trade between witness and mover. There's something like that. So I think there's something very, very powerful about the human interaction. But the reality is also that those can be, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of models. You could almost go to a weird Protestant Catholic thing. I'm going to stay with the religion thing for a moment, because the whole point of the Reformation was you don't need the priests, or the priests are not as important, right? That was what the fight was about, was the idea that Joe whatever in a certain part of Germany could read the Bible by themselves and access this stuff without having the mediation of the facilitator. And so I think I used to joke that it's no mistake that the Exploratorium happened in what had been a Protestant country, because I don't think it would have emerged in the same way in a place where you were used to there having to be teachers. But Orna, you can correct me on this if I'm or Christopher from Milano. We can talk about whether or not the Christian history of these things. But the point being, though, when you have mediation, when you are alone, both of those are very powerful. And what a space can or cannot do. Space and space design are limited, but they are also, I've wandered into churches in my life and had some very, very deep experiences just because I'm sitting there. And not religious experiences, just art historical ones, just meditative ones. So, all right.
I love it. All right, we're at time. That was fantastic. This was everything I expected it to be, but it was absolutely wonderful. Tom, do you have any sort of like final words for the community? Any sort of call out or things that they can do to support you and what you're doing?
Well, I'm sure that there are really interesting people on this call, some of whom I know. I'm seeing people, so hi to all of you. I haven't said hi to yet, but people who haven't. I'm interested in this. I mean, I'm T. Rockwell at the Exploratorium. But we're also working in a bunch of different places, even outside of the Exploratorium, because again, we might have to change institution types a little bit to get some of this work to be different for a new time. I don't know. Anyway, but I'm interested. So it's an invitation to be in dialogue and find each other wherever we all are.
All right, fantastic. And before this, Tom and I were plotting an IRL meetup maybe in San Francisco. So we'll get some local IRL stuff happening as well. UC, I see you there. Thank you for that. But thank you everybody for joining today. Tom, again, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful, brilliant. I have so many post-it notes to consider and dig through. I will see hopefully many of you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful Juneteenth, and I hope to see you again on a future Futurespaces. Thank you, everybody.